समुद्रवसने देवी पर्वतस्तनमण्डले विष्णुपत्न्यै नमस्तुभ्यं पादस्पर्शं क्षमस्व मे. Those who dare to fly don't care to leave their footprints behind. Welcome to FVS.
Very good morning, everybody.
Morning, sir.
Good morning. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll continue with dealing with the assumptions that we had started 2 classes before this, because these are the most critical, and it's important for you to understand what are the consequences of making these assumptions, and the fact that there are models which are possible even without making these assumptions, which we will not cover in this course, but it's something that you need to be familiar with, because some of these assumptions may not be appropriate. Elastic material, for most situations it is appropriate, therefore in green font. Material linearity, most of the cases it is, but in some cases it is not, and then how to incorporate that material nonlinearity. We just have to make a correction to the strain energy density that we introduced in the previous class. Instead of it being quadratic in the strains, it would be having nonlinear terms beyond the quadratic as well, which would incorporate the actual material behavior. And most of these material behaviors are determined through experiments, and the experimental observations leads to curve fittings for the stress versus the strain, and in turn for the energy which is stored within the material. As far as no body moments is concerned, we went through it in detail last time, and we saw that this is a fairly valid assumption, because most of the time we are not dealing with magnetic materials or such materials which have a body moment distribution potentially, and therefore the stresses become symmetric. Already the strains were symmetric from the fact that we had the definition of the strain. Irrespective of what definition of the strain it is, we would have a symmetric definition for the strain, and therefore the number of independent strain components reduces from 9 to 6, and with the no body moment assumption, the stress is also reduced to 6 in terms of the number of independent coefficients, though you have a fully populated house in general. Next, we went on to the existence of the strain energy density. We had just started this, so we will continue to cover that. So let's go ahead. The strain energy density, we are concerned primarily with the energy per unit volume, which we denoted by U3D, and then we said that the U3D is given by 1/2 E So it's basically quadratic in the strains, and the factor of half takes care of the fact that we are considering the loading to be gradual, which is what is the case most of the time. But when you deal with impact, etc., this factor of 2 will not be there, because the stress strain curve will reach that point of the current stress or strain almost instantaneously, rather than through a gradual increase. So, but this is what is valid for most static cases, and for low frequency vibration problems as well, to a large extent. So, which is what would be the predominant focus in this particular course, and is what is of main concern in the flight vehicle structures as well, except for a few situations that might arise in an accidental nature. So this actually leads to a further simplification in the stiffness matrix that we had. Remember that in the general case we had the Eij, KL, Ij, K and L all taking on the values of 3 each, but now we know that each of these combination of Ij has only 6 independent terms, and KL also has 6 independent terms, because of which you have 6 by 6 or 36 element matrix that we denoted by C. So we called C the stiffness matrix, and we have it as C11, C22, C33, C44, C55 and C66 as the diagonal terms. And the off diagonal terms are C12, C13, 14, etc. Okay, and it's a fully populated matrix. As of now, we don't know if this is symmetric or not, and the fact that it is symmetric actually arises from the fact that the strain energy density exists. So how are these two related to each other? The fact that it is symmetric and this is what we will start looking at in today's class. So what exactly does this existence of the strain energy density do is what we are trying to look at. Now we know that if we take the derivative of the strain energy density dou u3d with respect to epsilon ij to start with, then we get the stress sigma ij. That is because what you end up because it's a quadratic, there's a factor of 2, just like when you differentiate x squared you get 2x. Similarly, there is an epsilon squared over here, because of which there is a 2, and that 2 gets cancelled with this factor of half that you have over here, and because of that you end up with just Eijkl multiplied by epsilon kl, which is an implied summation over kl. So these two terms together constitute your sigma ij. So in other words, if you want to determine the stress components from the strain energy density, all you have to do is to take the derivative with respect to the corresponding coefficient corresponding coefficient epsilon ij, not Cij but epsilon ij, so that you have taken a derivative with respect to one of the strains. Only one of these other strains in the quadratic expression remains, and that multiplied by Eijkl with a summation over k and l from 1 to 3 gives rise to your stress component sigma ij. Now suppose you take the second derivative of this. Now then you see that you end up with your Eijkl, which is basically your the tensor that you have over there in terms of the material properties. So this particular relationship is what will show us that C, the matrix C that you have on this side over here, is actually symmetric. Okay, so this fact that it is symmetric, the question is still remaining. Now this fact will actually show us that indeed it is the case, because if this is the case, then we can write that the reverse order of these derivatives, that is, you take the derivative with respect to epsilon ij first, and then with respect to epsilon kl, then you are going to end up with Ekl ij, but obviously these two are equal to each other, because the order of the derivative doesn't matter. So the fact that the order of the derivative is immaterial means that the left hand sides of these two equations are equal, and therefore the right hand sides are equal to each other as well. What does this mean? That is, if you take the ijth component of the stress and relate it to the kth component of the strain, it is equivalent to relating the ijth component of the strain with the kth component of the stress. So in that sense, this is symmetric, which eventually means that this C matrix that you have here is indeed symmetric. So you can remove that question mark over there. So it is symmetric indeed. Okay. So is this conclusion clear, or anybody has a doubt on how we arrived at this? Okay, that's good. Yes. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Whether this existence of the strain energy density, is it an assumption, or should it be like necessary condition?
Yeah, very good question. For most materials, it is a valid assumption, because this does exist, because what you're talking about over here is actually in an essence the law of conservation of energy. That's why I brought in the fact that this is a thermodynamic result. So we are not going into the details of the thermodynamic aspects of the derivation, because beyond the scope of this course. But for most materials, when you do certain work on them, that work gets stored in them in the form of strains, and then when you release that, because it's an elastic material, it gains back its original shape and size, which means that it is capable of now doing work on anything else that comes into contact with it, and therefore it is releasing that energy which you had stored in it internally by means of the work that you had done in order to put it in that particular position. So now whether that internal energy is exactly what is the amount of work done and whether it is entirely recoverable depends upon the specific material, how accurate this is. In almost all the materials, you will have certain loss which might come because of certain heat which is generated. For example, when you are compressing a material or extending a material and then releasing it, there will be certain energy losses which are associated with the friction that is there within the material in terms of the movement of the various atoms and molecules within the material across each other. So there is a certain small amount of loss, but for elastic materials, which means that you're talking of metals, you're talking of most fibers that you're dealing with, irrespective of what that fiber is made out of, and to a large extent the matrix all the way up to its failure, and the metal of course only up to its elastic limit. These are ceramics also up to the point of their failure, brittle failure. They are predominantly elastic in the sense that the strains are very small, and within those small strains you have a linear dependence, and when you remove that load it comes back to the zero stress or zero strain condition, and that is basically a situation where there is no deformation as well, no permanent deformation, and therefore there is no plastic behavior as such, or rather more generally no inelastic behavior, and which means that you have this existence of the strain energy density. Otherwise, you would need to make corrections to this expression for what we have for the strain energy density. Yes, even in other materials, inelastic materials, there will be a certain strain energy which is stored, but it will not be the entire work, and it will not depend only on the strain. We will have to look at what is known as the strain energy rate, or what we call as the strain power density. The strain power density rather than the strain energy density becomes critical. You know that power is related to energy as the rate of change of the energy with respect to time. In this case, we are talking about the three-dimensional strain energy density, or what we would write as U3D dot. Okay, so this would be the strain power density, and you might have to consider that because there could be some change which is happening with respect to time as well. and that has to be incorporated. But we are ignoring all of that right now, because even the correct stress definition that you have and the correct strain definition that you have will not actually depend on the strain energy density, but on the strain power density. This is what would actually imply what are the conjugates. In other words, which stress definition is appropriate along with which strain definition. At the end of last class, somebody asked about biological tissues, and I explained about the Green-Lagrange strain tensor and what it is conjugate to in terms of the second Piola-Kirchhoff stress tensor, etc. But we will keep things simple over here. All that we are dealing with is the true stress over here, and the strain as the nonlinear strain definition that I showed you in the last class, involving two linear terms and one quadratic term. On the quadratic term, of course, there is a summation over a dummy index, and therefore for a three-dimensional space it would have three terms, but nonetheless that is the definition that we would stick to. But recollect that either one of these, as I said at the end of last class, should give rise to the same scalar quantity, the strain energy, but more appropriately when you go to inelastic materials, etc., or even elastic materials which can bring in certain other aspects like viscoelasticity or hyperelasticity beyond the scope of this course. But just keep in mind that they are also elastic materials, but you will then need to start talking about the strain power density. And even in the regular elastic materials, when impact problems, etc., come into picture, the dependence on time becomes critical, and that has to be brought in as well. Whereas the materials that we will deal with in this course are restricted to those which are of a local elasticity, not affected by the neighborhood, and those which are not affected by the history, what I call as the non-karmic materials, because it doesn't matter what kind of stress history or strain history that material has gone through in the past. It just doesn't matter. What is the current strain at a particular point? That alone determines the stress at that particular point, and therefore the energy stored around that point in terms of an energy density, which when integrated over the entire volume gives a total strain energy which is stored in the entire body made out of that material. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay. So good. So let's see this. Now that we have proved that the C matrix is symmetric under this particular assumption of the existence of the strain energy density, therefore the number of constants there, which was 6 into 6, 36, becomes just the 6 diagonal elements and the 15 off diagonal elements over here. So you have 6 diagonal elements and the 15 off diagonal elements. Okay, so you have 6 plus 15, a total of 21 independent constants. You still have all the 36 which could in general be non-zero, but 21 of them are independent. In knowing these 21, we can populate the rest of the matrix because it is symmetric. So this is the next assumption that we had, and then we go on to the fifth assumption, which is orthotropy. Before we go to orthotropy, let's understand this word a little more detail. It's made out of, it's a compound word made out of prefix ortho and suffix tropy. Tropy meaning direction, and ortho meaning orthogonal or rectangular or perpendicular to each other. So in that sense, what we are talking about is the existence of three principal material directions. Now you are familiar with principal directions, maybe of stress, principal stress directions, principal strain directions, etc., whereby you can actually convert a particular matrix, which is a fully populated matrix, into a diagonal matrix by making certain transformations to different set of coordinate measures. That is, you start with a coordinate measure x1, x2 and x3, and you go to some other coordinate system by means of 3 rotations, x1 star, x2 star and x3 star, where they're still orthogonal to each other, it is still a dextral triad. But if you write along the system x1, x2, x3, the stress is given by the fully populated sigma 1, 1, sigma 2, 2, sigma 3, 3, sigma 1, 2, sigma 1, 3 and sigma 2, 3 symmetric. Whereas in the starred system, that is in the x star coordinate system, you have only a sigma 1, 1 star, sigma 2, 2 star and a sigma 3, 3 star, and the rest are all zeros. Once again symmetric. So this is known as the principal stress direction. Principal stress direction. And you're probably aware of how you go about finding that. We will probably touch upon that in one of the later classes, just as a review. But what we are now interested is there something called the principal material direction? Is there a direction which is associated with the material? And that's what orthotropy is actually leading us into. So to start with, let us look at one by one. We'll not go into orthotropy right away. We will start with what is known as a monoclinic material, of which orthotropic materials are a subset. By which mono we basically mean that there is a single plane of symmetry. Mono means single and monoclinic means a single plane of symmetry. So in other words, if you bring in, let's say, a cuboidal piece of material, and we introduce the coordinate system about its midplane, let's say x1, x2 and x3 in the upward vertical direction. Now if this particular material is monoclinic, then what we are saying is there is a particular plane of symmetry in this. In other words, the material above that plane of symmetry behaves in the same way, whether it is above that plane or below that plane. Without any loss of generality, we can assume that suppose this x1, x2, x3 is oriented or chosen in such a way that the x1, x2 plane is the one which is the plane of symmetry, then you would have this particular plane that I'm showing over here as the plane of symmetry. So what that ensures is that any property at some value of x3 equal to, let's say, h star should be equal to the same property at x3 is equal to minus h star as well. So in other words, it's like a mirror reflection about that. If those of you are familiar with rotation matrices, if you can think of this is all, what it is saying is that you have a rotation matrix which is of the form of the identity almost, but this particular term instead of being plus 1 is minus 1. That is, about x3 you are making a rotation of 180 degrees and cosine of 180 degrees is minus 1, and therefore you have this minus 1 coming into picture over there. So this is the rotation matrix which takes care of that kind of plane of symmetry, and depending upon whether it is a vector or whether it is a dyadic or a quartic or a triad, we will have different rules of rotation, but all of them will involve this particular matrix R, and it will involve as many times as is the order or rank of the tensor. That is basically, if it's a second rank tensor, it will involve an R transpose along with an R. If it is quartic, then it will involve R transpose twice and R twice as well. So that is basically what we are trying to showcase over here. Can we take advantage of that? Already we said that we have 21 constants in C. Now can we have a further reduction in the number of constants that are there in the stiffness matrix? In order to understand this a little better, it's actually good to go back to your EIJKL definition rather than the simplified C definition and see what is actually happening over here, because all of these rules of tensors, that is multiplication by R transpose R, etc., will be valid only for the tensorial notations, that is when treating the stiffness as a fourth order tensor, that is EIJKL, rather than as just CIJ, which is just a simplified notation for our convenience. Even though it has only two subscripts, it doesn't mean that we have reduced a fourth order tensor to a second order tensor. CIJ is not a mathematically rigorous way of expression. It is only for our convenience, but it is commonly used, and we will continue to use that in today's and in the future classes. But always keeping in mind that whenever we want to make certain manipulations using certain formula for tensors, certain rules for tensors, then we need to go back to the EIJKL, which is what we will look at now. So let's see what this EIJKL is actually doing over here. We will still go to the 6x6 representation, but instead of writing it in terms of the epsilons, we will write it in terms of the in terms of the C's. We will write it in terms of the EIJKL. So recollect that this matrix, the column matrix or column vector that we formed was to put the normal stresses first, and then we went to looking at the shear stresses, sigma 2,3, sigma 3,1, and sigma 1,2. Another way I mentioned that how you come up with this order is that in this term 1 is missing, and in this term 2 is missing, and in this term 3 is missing. And that's how you come up with that ordering of those three shear stresses. Another way to look at it is just to look at this stiffness, the stress matrix, and you go from sigma 1,1 to sigma 2,2 to sigma 3,3, and then you turn around and go to sigma 2,3, sigma 1,3, and sigma 1,2. So it is in that direction you're basically listing it out. So you're basically expanding this out, a symmetric matrix, the upper triangular part of it, to a 6x1 matrix that you have over here. Okay, so now this is related to your epsilon 1,1, epsilon 2,2, epsilon 3,3, and now for this particular case, because we are only interested in the simplification, we will not go into the engineering strains, but we will still stick to the tensorial shear strains, that is epsilon 2,3 instead of 2 epsilon 2,3, epsilon 3,1, and epsilon 1,2. So now if you put it in terms of this, there is a stiffness matrix that is there over here, which is going to be given by E1111, etc. And now we are just focused on a few of those which we are interested in seeing whether they would be further simplified. So let me look at a few of these. So let me divide this into 4 submatrices over here, and let me focus on this matrix on the top right end. So what is it relating? First of all, you basically put the row and the column over there. So what we are talking about here is an E, which is involved with a stress component that it is relating is 2,3 to the strain component, which it is, sorry, So the stress component that it is relating is the one in the first row, which is sigma 1 1, and it is relating to the strain component, which is epsilon 2 3, because it is in the 1 4 location, that is the first row, fourth column. The first row relates to sigma 1 1, and the fourth here relates to epsilon 2 3, and therefore it is E 1 1 2 3, right? Okay. Now the next term over there would be again E 1 1, but this time associated with 3 1. Okay. Then you would have okay, let's go step by step. Let's just consider this first row alone, E 1 1, and the last strain that is there is E 1 2. So these are the three things that it relates. Now let's look at one by one each one of these terms. Let's start with E 1 1 2 3. What it is relating. So it is relating a sigma 1 1. Of course, it has many other terms, and the term that we are interested in looking at is E 1 1 2 3, which multiplies epsilon 2 3. Okay. Now we want to see, can a sigma 1 1 in this particular example cause an epsilon 2 3? Is it at all possible? That is what we are trying to look at over here. In other words, can this E 1 1 2 3, can it be non-zero? That is the question that we are trying to raise over here, because we are now talking about monoclinic materials which have a plane of symmetry, and by introducing a coordinate system such that x3 equal to 0 is the plane of symmetry, in other words the x1 x2 plane is the plane of symmetry, we want to consider what is actually happening there. Now let's look at what sigma 1 1 means. Sigma 1 1 means that I am okay, so I should probably have, okay, so yeah, here's the 1 2 plane. Okay, fine. So now what we are trying to do is to apply stress sigma 1 1 over here, and we are seeing whether this can cause an epsilon 2 3. Now what is epsilon 2 3? Epsilon 2 3 is basically a change in the 2 3 plane. So the 2 3 plane, for example, is the front face over here. So now let's take an element over here on the top and an element over here on the bottom. Now what we are saying is that the epsilon 2 3 is basically making this rectangle into a trapezoid like this, right? Now there is no preferred direction for this. Should this move in the shear, should it happen in this way as we have shown in this particular picture, or should it happen in a different direction like this? So you can use a physical argument to make the fact that you cannot have a preferred direction for this because of the symmetry that is there over here, and therefore you would show that this E 1 1 2 3 is actually equal to 0. So this is a physical argument. The same thing can be done in a mathematical way by using this R, and using R for the quartic tensor that we are having over here, E, which will involve 2 times of an R transpose multiplication and 2 times an R multiplication. So that's a little lengthy process, but I will not go into the details of that. So there are 2 ways of proving that this particular element that we have over here is actually, I'm sorry, this one that we are having over here is actually going to be 0. One is a physical argument based on the plane of symmetry, and the other is a mathematical argument based on R's. Yes, somebody had a question.
Sir, I didn't understand the elemental area you are considering, the smallest one, the direction of that.
Yeah, so I'm considering it on the front face, that is basically on the x2 x3 plane. Okay, because the strain that we are interested in is epsilon 2,3, remember over here. So because epsilon 2,3 is what is of consideration, I'm basically looking at what is happening in the 2,3 plane. In a 2,3 plane, a rectangle which changes its shape is basically having a non-zero epsilon 2,3. I'm saying that can sigma 1,1 cause an epsilon 2,3 at all? Is there a relationship between them? If there is, then this potentially can be non-zero. That is, E1123 can be non-zero. But what we are seeing is that if there is an E23, then the skewness that can be there can be either to the left or to the right. But there can be no preference for that because there is a plane of symmetry at x3 equal to 0. So above x3, whatever happens should happen below x3 as well. Whereas once you have this constant, it is going to be fixed. That is, your E1123 will not change sign. It will remain the same for the given material. So without changing E1123, is it possible to change the sign of epsilon 2,3? No, unless and until this E1123 is 0, because in that case positive 0 and negative 0 are one and the same. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, can you show in the diagram like the direction of epsilon 2,3? Do you represent there?
So let me redraw that in a little bigger way so that it's probably clearer. So what I'm saying is that on this phase, which is basically having an element over here which is originally rectangular, we are saying that it will get skewed.
Sir, it is in
Right.
1,3 plane.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. So let me talk about E1113 then. You're right. Sorry about that mistake. But the same argument holds because I would have proved for E31 next. So what is basically happening is the, yeah, go ahead.
So even if it is 1,3 plane,
Uh-huh.
the smallest side of the rectangle can be considered as a 2,3 plane, right? If we consider elemental shape of it. So I think the consideration what we have done is correct. Like the effect will be same.
See, because both are equivalent arguments, whatever I'm doing for 2,3 or 1,3 is equivalent to each other, because in both the cases 3 is appearing only once. See, that is the main point over here, and the other element happens to be either 1 or 2. Okay, so as long as that is the case and the stress that we are dealing with is not involving a 3 by itself, in this case we are talking about sigma 1,1, then the same argument holds. But what we are basically saying is that whatever happens on the top should happen on the bottom, and that is possible if and only if this element is 0, because otherwise, because the sign of E1123 can itself or E1113 itself cannot change, therefore it has to be 0. That is the argument over there. You can just draw these two things and verify for yourself. If you still have an issue, we'll discuss that during the next class. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you. I just got confused with that.
Yeah. You're right. Thanks for pointing me out that this is actually the 1,3 plane, which is, you're right about that. This is x1 and x3, but the same argument holds for the x2, x3 plane as well. The same argument will hold, and because of which, in fact, we will show that both of these are actually equal to 0. So this is 0 as well. Okay. And same analogy can be used for the other stress in the 2 direction as well, which is also in the plane of this whatever we are looking at, sigma 2 over here. If we use, once again, we would prove that these two terms that we saw in the matrix over here, which is the first row, 4th and 5th columns, same thing will argument can be used for the 4th and the 4th and 5th columns of the 2nd row as well, which is what is associated with sigma 2 over here. So effectively what that leads to is that the stiffness matrix now has these 4 zeros. And if you look at epsilon 1 2, which is basically again a shear strain in the 1 2 plane, that is basically on the mid surface, if you take of that plane, you're basically talking about the stress or strain. Now that is also or if you think of the stress or the strain, what doesn't matter, the direct effect of sigma 1 2 would be epsilon 1 2, and that of course is there. But the question is, will there be an epsilon 1 3 and epsilon 2 3 because of that? And we can show that using the same argument, either mathematically using the R and R transpose, the rotation matrix over here, with the direction cosine -1 because of cos pi radians of 180 degrees. Because of that, because that is what reflection actually means, it's a rotation about 180 degrees, it should be immune to that. In other words, all the constants should remain the same. So using the same argument, we can show that these two elements go to 0 as well. And then on the other hand, we will have the last particular element that is in this matrix, if you see, is epsilon 1 2. Now that is in the plane of symmetry, so that can still be excited by the in plane stresses, that is sigma 1 1, sigma 2 2. Oh, I'm sorry, what I was talking about was sigma 3 3 over here. Please excuse me, this is associated not with sigma 1 2, because the third row is actually associated with sigma 3 3. Okay, so sigma 3 3 also you can use the same argument to show that you are basically having sigma 3 3 which can excite these three elements, which will be non-zero, but cannot excite these two, which will be 0. Once again, you can use either the mathematical or the physical arguments in order to show that. On the other hand, all of these three can be excited, because what they are multiplying is actually your epsilon 1 2 over here, and that can actually, being in the plane or that is parallel to the plane of symmetry, 1 2 is the plane which is parallel to the plane of symmetry according to the coordinate system that we have introduced, x1 x2, and therefore it can actually be excited by any one of these, that is the normal stresses sigma 1 1, sigma 2 2 and sigma 3 3. So you would see that these still exist as non-zero values, that is you have your E11 1 2, E22 3 1 and E33, which is associated with sigma 3 3 along, sorry, this is 2 3 and this is 1 2. Okay, so these can actually exist because your, I'm sorry, what am I doing? Oh, I'm sorry, it's all of these are associated with 1 2, right? All of these are associated with 1 2. Yeah, so only the stress is changing because the strain in the last column is the same. It's always epsilon 1 2, which is what is multiplying the last column. So it's all epsilon 1 2. Let me write that clearly. So what we have there is E11 associated with 1 2, E11 associated, E22 associated with 1 2 and E33 associated with 1 2. So all of those can be non-zero in general. okay, because the symmetry argument or the R multiplication will not render them to be 0. So you can actually look through that and you would see that those three in general can be non-zero. On the other hand, when you come to these two terms which are associated with sigma 2 3 and sigma 3 1 and associated with epsilon 1 2. So basically what we are saying is that those which are in plane, that is sigma 1 1, sigma 2 2 and sigma 1 2, when it is associated with an out of plane which is either epsilon 3 1, epsilon 2 3 or epsilon 3 3, then you are getting zeros. When it is the in plane with in plane or the out of plane with the out of plane, you are not getting the zeros. So that is basically what it is. Another way to look at it is from a mathematical point of view, whenever you have odd number of 3's in the coefficient Eij KL, so you have Eij KL, if there are odd number of 3's, because x3 equal to 0 is the plane of symmetry that we are considering, x3 equal to 0 is the plane of symmetry, and because x3 equal to 0 is a plane of symmetry, whenever you have odd number of 3's in the Eij KL amongst the Ij and KL, you would get a 0. And whenever you have either no 3's or you have an even number of 3's, that is 2 or 4, for example, you have E3333, there are 4 3's, and that is basically going to be non-zero. So that's what you would have at this particular location. E3333 being a diagonal term, it will be non-zero. Similarly, when you have just 2 of them, also you would have non-zeros. That is when these terms, for example, and that's why you saw that this was also non-zero, because there are 2 3's in that amongst the subscripts. So taking the subscripts and the superscripts together, if you have an odd number of 3's, then those terms would go to 0. And if you have an even number of 3's or 0 number of 3's, then that will remain. So that is basically what is happening over here in this particular case. Then of course you have the symmetry, because of which you would have these terms correspondingly going to 0 and these terms going to 0. The rest all are going to be non-zero in general. Is this clear? If there are any doubts, I'd like to answer that. Okay, fine. So this is when you have one plane of symmetry, which is what we call as the monoclinic material, just taken to showcase what is happening when you have a plane of symmetry. But this is something which is rarely considered in the case of composite materials, because you have actually the advantage of 3 planes of symmetry over there, so you do not need this particular argument at all. But there are lots of monoclinic materials, like for example feldspar, which is one of the most abundant materials in the Earth's crust. Almost 41% of the Earth's crust is made out of feldspar, and that is a monoclinic material which has only one plane of symmetry. So it's not that this is a purely theoretical or mathematical argument which is not of any significance. A lot of crystalline materials, people look at this particular kind of material as well, because there are both natural and synthesized materials which are of this kind. But from a composites point of view, that is of no consequence to us. We have 3 planes of symmetry, which means that all of these actually go to 0 as well, because they go in pairs. Whether you have one plane of symmetry, then these let me probably indicate that. So you have a matrix over here which is divided into 4 sub-matrices. We showcase that this set of 2 columns over here in this matrix, sub-matrix, go to 0. Same way, when you take another plane of symmetry, these 2 columns will go to 0. Or if you take the third plane of symmetry, then this and this will go to 0. So the end effect when you have 3 planes of symmetry is that this entire sub-matrix basically going to 0. Similarly, in this case, you would have only the diagonal terms because you see over here that we showcase that these two elements are 0 in one case. If you bring in a second plane of symmetry, you can showcase that these two are 0. If you bring in a third plane of symmetry, you can showcase that these three are 0. But in this process, you would have also observed that whether I have two planes of symmetry, both of which of course should be orthogonal to each other, if I have two planes of symmetry or I have three planes of symmetry, doesn't matter. The same simplification ensues. Because if I have two planes of symmetry, already this entire submatrix over here is going to go to 0. This entire thing is going to go to 0 once you have two planes of symmetry, because with the first plane this went to 0 and the second plane this went to 0. So it's not essential for me to say this and this go to 0. So the third plane of symmetry might be useful in some other ways, but in terms of the simplification of this particular matrix, it doesn't bring any utility. Again, you would see that once I have told that this and this are 0, all the three elements, there are only three off diagonal elements in this submatrix. So all three have already gone to 0. So there's no point in my talking about this going to 0, because anyway, because of the other two planes of symmetry, that has already gone to 0. So the end effect is that you have a set of 9 zeros over here and a set of 3 zeros over here. So in the 21 that we had independent, you have now lost 9 plus 3, which is 12, and therefore you have only 9 constants which are remaining. Whereas in the case of the monoclinic material, you had 6 plus 2, only 8 were gone, and therefore for the monoclinic material, you had 21 minus 8, which is 13 independent constants that you have over there. The rest are either 0, or because of the symmetry, you can get them from the remaining terms like E1, 1, 1, 2, etc. Here what is happening is the only place where you have off diagonal elements is in the first submatrix over here, where you still have this term, and this term being non-zero. Of course, it's symmetric, so you would have them on this side as well. So of course the diagonal terms are all there. In addition, there are these three off diagonal terms, and those three off diagonal terms that you see over here, 1, 2 and 3, are all associated with the Poisson's effect. So if Poisson's ratio was 0 for that material in those particular directions, then you would have those going to 0 as well. But as you know, for most materials, Poisson's ratio is a small positive number around 0.3 or so. So you would have those three making a contribution. Those are the only three off diagonal elements which remain. So this 9 can also be thought of as 6 diagonal elements and 3 off diagonal elements, all of which are associated with a Poisson's ratio nu ij not being equal to 0, where I is the direction of the input in the direction in which you are applying the stress, and j is the direction in which you're measuring the strain. So that is the correspondence that you're talking about, and this of course valid only for the normal strains, and therefore when we say epsilon 1, we actually mean epsilon 1, 1, and when we say epsilon 3, for example, we mean only epsilon 3, 3. So that's the ratio that we are looking at with a negative sign, because when a tension causes a compression in the other directions, normally for most materials, which we discussed in the definition of the Poisson's ratio last time. So is this clear that for orthotropic materials, we are ending up with only 9 constants? But remember that what we have taken over here in this picture is that x1, x2 and x3 are the principal material directions. In other words, just like we dealt with the principal stresses or principal stress directions over here in this particular problem, we are talking of a principal material direction such that it is the plane of symmetry. For a monoclinic material, x3 would be a principal material direction, but in the x1 x2 plane, any one of those directions can be the principal material directions. But once you bring in either 2 or 3 planes of symmetry, then you have, in addition to x3 equal to 0, x1 equal to 0 and the x2 equal to 0 planes also becoming the planes of symmetry. So the x1, x2, x3 directions as shown over here are the principal material directions. So this simplification that we are talking about for having 9 constants, 9 non-zero constants, 9 non-zero is valid only if the chosen coordinate measures x1, x2, x3 are along the principal material directions. What is also called as specially orthotropic. On the other hand, in the same case, I can introduce my x1, x3 and x2 along some other orthogonal directions. Now in that sense, you would still have only 9 independent coefficients. So let me write that on this side. So for non-principal directions, you would have, let's call them as, let's say, x1 star. Let me not use star because that's what I think I used last time. Okay. Let's say y1, y2 and y3. Then you would have, in general, a fully populated matrix. For the material constants, which we are calling as Cij. So in other words, you would have 36 non-zero terms over there, but you would still have only 9 of them independent, because the others can be obtained in terms of those 9 plus the angle by which y1, y2, y3 coordinate system differs from the x1, x2, x3 coordinate system. And in general, you can have 3 angles by which the rotation can take place in order to reach one coordinate system from another. Okay, so in some special cases, you would have just one rotation about x1 or 2 rotations about x1 and x2. But in general, the relation between 2 coordinate systems in a 3-dimensional space involves 3 rotations, which is because reference frame is like a rigid body in a sense that it has 3 degrees of freedom associated with translation and 3 with rotation. So therefore 3 rotations are possible in going from one configuration to another in general. And therefore, in terms of those 3 angles, which is assumed to be known because the 2 coordinate systems x1, x2, x3 as well as y1, y2, y3 are provided to us, and therefore the angles between them are known. Therefore the rotation matrix, just like what we wrote here for R, which is basically a rotation about the x1, x2 plane by an angle 180 degrees, is how we went to the other coordinate system. So on the other hand, what we are talking about here is through 3 separate angles, let's say theta 1, theta 2, theta 3, we have moved from an x1, x2, x3 coordinate system to a y1, y2, y3 coordinate system. Then we would have the Cij matrix, which is fully populated because of the quartic transformation that has to happen, including the R and the R transpose matrix, which are now function, those matrices are would be functions of theta 1, theta 2 and theta 3. This is the rotation matrix. and your Cij would now be a function of the Cij that you have from this particular thing, that is the 9, the specially orthotropic case, let me call that as C star, and the R matrix, which involves 3 separate angles, theta 1, theta 2 and theta 3. So is this clear how we reduced it to 9 independent coefficients, irrespective of whether we are talking of the specially orthotropic material or what we call here as the generally orthotropic material? The only difference between these two is that generally and specially is that the specially one is utilizing the principal material directions, that is, it is orienting those coordinate axes along the planes of symmetry, along the 3 planes of symmetry, whereas in the general case we are not orienting it along the planes of symmetry, we allow it to be along any arbitrary direction. So that's the only difference. The material itself is not different. It's only in terms of the geometric configuration or the frames of reference that you introduce that they are different, one being specially orthotropic, the other being generally orthotropic. But the nature of the matrix changes from being a matrix which is sparse, having only 9 non-zero, to all fully populated matrix. Sorry, there it's actually 12, because you have 6 along the diagonal, 6 along the diagonal, and 3 on either side of the diagonal, which of course are related to each other because of the symmetry, but only 9 are independent. Okay, 12 non-zero, 9 independent. So here you have 36 non-zero, and you still have only 9 independent, but of course the theta 1, theta 2 and theta 3 will play a role as well. Is this clear? Okay. So now that we have done with orthotropy, let's go into the next assumption that we are going to make, which is transverse isotropy. Okay. So what is transverse isotropy is clearly evident if you look at this particular laminate that I have shown over here, and you take just one layer of that. Let's take the top layer of this particular laminate. So now if you take the top layer of this laminate, you see that whether it is any direction which is perpendicular to that fiber, that is either along, let me go back to this. So if you just take that top layer over here, so now if you take the fibers in that particular layer, they are running along this particular direction. So now if you introduce a coordinate system which is, let's say, x1 along this, x2 along this, and x3 in this direction, then you see that it's a right-handed dextral triad. x1 is also called as the longitudinal direction because it is parallel to the fibers. But if you look at x2 and x3 direction, both of them are perpendicular to the fiber. So in that sense, both are transverse directions. So whereas this is denoted, because it's longitudinal, it's denoted by L. This is denoted by T because it's a transverse direction, because it is perpendicular to the fibers. But you see that x3 is also perpendicular to the fiber, and therefore this is also transverse direction, also indicated by T, but we want to distinguish from this T and therefore we introduce, let's say, T prime. Okay, with an understanding that both T and T prime are transverse directions, both are perpendicular to the fiber, but now these two are going to have some kind of a similarity, because in both cases it is perpendicular to the fiber. So how it behaves in x2 direction will be very similar to how it behaves in the x3 direction. But for that matter, if you take the x2 x3 plane and you take anything else along that, let's say some other x2 star and x3 star, two different directions which are making with the x2 and x3 an angle, let's say theta over there, then you see that, those two directions, x2 star and x3 star, are also still perpendicular to the fiber. In other words, they are also in some sense the transverse directions as well. And if you want to distinguish them, you can call them as T prime. But the essence of this is to say that in the plane which is perpendicular to the fiber, which in our example of the coordinate system happens to be the x2 x3 plane, there is some level of isotropy which is involved. So in other words, it's independent of whether I take the x2 x3 system or the x2 star x3 star system, and that again is independent of what value of this angle theta that I take. Irrespective of all of these, the material properties are going to remain the same. So that is an advantage that we are going to utilize in order to further simplify what we are talking about in the case of the stiffness matrix. So now let's go back to the simplified stiffness matrix that we have over here, which involves a C11, a C22, a C33, C44, which is a shear stiffness, C55 also a shear stiffness, and C66 another shear stiffness over here. And then we saw that in the principal material direction, which is what is specially orthotropic, let's consider that for now, because that's what we have drawn this x1, x2, x3 in. They are the principal material directions because one of them is associated with the fiber direction, the other two are perpendicular to that, and irrespective of whether we take x2, x3 or x2 star, x3 star, the format of this particular stiffness matrix and the values as well would remain the one and the same. So which are the non-zero values? You have only the Poisson effect C12, C13 and C23. The rest are all zeros, and this matrix is symmetric as well. Okay, so these are the 9 independent coefficients we had in the case of the specially orthotropic material. Now we are bringing in an additional simplification of transverse isotropy, by which we are meaning that the 2 and the 3 directions are interchangeable, what we call as the T and the T prime, because both are the transverse directions, and therefore whatever happens in 2 should happen in the 3 direction as well. So what does that mean? For example, because you should also know what these are relating. So let's see, let's write that sigma 11, sigma 22, sigma 33, sigma 23, sigma 31 and sigma 12, right? These are associated with the directions 1, 2 and 6. Now we are saying that 2 and 3 are kind of interchangeable as far as the C matrix is concerned. Again, now we have introduced it in terms of the 6 by 6 matrix with subscripts going all the way up to 6. So it might not be very clear, but it is quite clear that what we are talking about are these indices associated with 2. So in other words, sigma 22 is like sigma TT, whereas this is sigma LL. This is sigma T prime, that is sigma 33, and what you have here is a shear stress in the plane of isotropy, that is the transverse plane, which is T prime, and this is sigma T prime L, and this is sigma L T. Okay, so now what we are saying is that T and T prime are interchangeable, which means that we can now say that C22 is equal to C33, because whatever happens to sigma TT and sigma 2 TT prime corresponding to epsilon TT and epsilon TT prime should be one and the same. In other words, the relationship between, direct relationship between sigma TT and epsilon TT should be very similar to the relationship between sigma TT prime, T prime and epsilon T prime. Okay, so when we are talking of the C matrix, of course we are talking of the engineering shear strains rather than the tensorial shear strains. So that is basically what is considered over here. So now C22 is equal to C23. Similarly, you would see that C12 should be equal to C13, because one is the same L, and one case you are talking of basically a T, and the other case you are talking of a T prime. But it's always best to go to the original EIJKL in order to understand this, because the EIJKL, all the I, J, K and L are varying between 1 to 3. You see that wherever 2 and 3 are getting interchanged, you have the same kind of result that is actually happening over there. Now let's come to this particular shear stresses over here. Now in the case of the shear stresses, the ones which are equivalent are these two, not the first two but the last two, because here you are interchanging 2 and 3 over here and keeping the one the same. In other words, you are having a T prime instead of a T over here, and so what we are saying is that this C55 and C66 should be equal to each other. Anyway, the rest are all zeros, so it doesn't matter. But there is also one more thing which results, which is basically coming from the fact that we have a plane of isotropy, and we know that for isotropic materials, fully isotropic materials, not transversely isotropic, for fully isotropic materials, we know that G is not independent of the Young's modulus and the shear modulus. It's given by E by 2 into 1 plus nu. Okay, so now the same argument can be used to showcase that your C23, which is C4, which is in the plane, yeah, so it's in the plane, that is basically your sigma TT prime, the relationship of that with 2 epsilon TT prime, which is basically the element C44, is going to have similarly a relationship between C22 and C23. So that, in other words, this, when generalized to the transversely isotropic material, says that your C44 is now going to be related to your C22 and C23, these Poisson's effect ratios. So one is a direct one, the other is a Poisson one, and divided by 2. So your homework for today is to prove this. Prove that C44 is equal to C22 minus C23 by 2, and if you are familiar with how to derive this, then it is almost identical in terms of how you go about doing that. So it's quite straightforward to do this. So I would urge you to, if you have forgotten how to derive G is equal to E by 2 into 1 plus nu for isotropic materials, this is a good opportunity to revise that, because then you would use a very similar procedure in order to prove that for transversely isotropic materials as opposed to fully isotropic materials, in which case even the one direction is the same as the 2 and 3 directions in material behavior. Now only 2 and 3 directions are same. So therefore things that are associated are with the 2 and the 3 directions over there. So equivalently, of course, this can be written as C33 because we have already shown that C22 and C33 are equal to each other. So with this, I conclude today's class. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take that. Okay then, thank you very much.
मृत्युंजय मंत्राः
त्र्यंबकं यजामहे सुगंधिं पुष्टिवर्धनम् उर्वारुकमिव बन्धनान् मृत्योर्मुक्षीयमामृतात् एते सहस्रमयुतं पाशा मृत्योर्मर्त्याय हन्तवे तान् यज्ञस्य मायया सर्वान् वयजामहे मृत्यवे स्वाहा मृत्यवे स्वाहा।